Gentlemen, welcome to our channel. If you, like me, do not support adultery and believes that cheaters should be fully responsible for their actions, then like this video and do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Well, let's get started. Before delving into recent events, let's start with D-Day, which occurred in the spring of 2017 year. At that time, my wife and I were about 30 years old. We had been together since our student years. We also had a child attending elementary school. Initially, I had suspicions about my wife having an extramarital relationship, but when I expressed my concerns, they were immediately rejected. But over time, my fears were confirmed and I, having evidence, made claims to her. Despite persistent denial, she eventually gave up and confessed her guilt, shedding tears and begging for forgiveness. At that moment, my internal reaction was to demand her immediate departure and begin the process of filing for divorce. It is important to tell about how the events that led to the disclosure of her infidelity unfolded. Although it did not come to physical intimacy, there were already plans for an intimate meeting. A few months before that fateful day, I noticed that my wife began to use the phone more and more often, showing increased caution. She turned away from me when she used the phone and quickly put it away when I entered the room. I also noticed that she takes it with her to the bath or shower, which seemed strange to me. But at first, I did not attach any importance to this, since it did not cause serious suspicions. But then there was one incident that really caught my attention. We have always freely used each other's phones without being shy. If one of us asked to see the other's phone, we just gave it away without any questions. But the day I wanted to find a new restaurant, it was obvious that something was wrong. I offered to visit a new restaurant, but at that moment my phone was charging. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked her to give me her phone number. When she asked about the reason, I explained it to her. Without giving up the phone, she found the menu and shared it with me, not letting it out of her hands all the time. This, as well as other features of behavior, began to arouse my suspicions. After pondering my fears for several days, I finally plucked up the courage and asked her directly if something was going on between her and someone else. In response, she reassured me that nothing was happening. One of her close friends was faced with a deeply personal and sensitive issue, and she was determined to preserve their privacy. She assured me of her love and devotion to our relationship and family, making it clear that she would never jeopardize what we have. It was reasonable for her to give preference to the support of a friend, and I decided to leave everything as it is. But despite all my efforts, an uneasy feeling in my stomach did not leave me, suggesting that there is something more to this situation. The suspicious behavior seemed to have stopped, or so I thought. In addition, a significant incident occurred, which further convinced me that something unusual was happening. I will try to approach this delicately, although I think that the details are of great importance. One afternoon, when we were in an intimate setting, she suddenly reached for her phone, expressing a desire to record the process on video. This was quite unusual, as she is usually reserved and always felt somewhat insecure around the cameras, even in a normal setting, so I thought it was rather strange, but I assumed that maybe she wanted to add some spice to our experience. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked about the purpose of using the camera. A little embarrassed, she said that she wanted to observe herself. Seeing this new adventurous side of her, I approved of the idea and decided to agree. She started her performance by setting up a camera and filming herself on a selfie camera, magnifying the image on her face, capturing every detail of her intense engagement. I was pleasantly surprised by her active participation, because she usually did this only at my request, but this time he readily agreed. Without taking her eyes off the camera and radiating captivating enthusiasm, the sensual sound she made intensified the intensity of what was happening and fascinated me. When the performance reached its climax, she went further, demonstrating the achievement in front of the camera. I regret that I have to acknowledge the importance of this video in the future, but it certainly matters. Despite the obvious deviation from our usual behavior, I decided not to make a fuss about it, not wanting to embarrass or discourage her from adventures. Instead, I maintained a sense of normality, secretly hoping that we could explore this new experience together. But since my wife and I have been in a permanent relationship since the age of 20, her sudden change in character caused a familiar instinctive feeling in me. A few weeks after the video incident, I decided to check her phone for suspicious messages or photos. But after checking the phone, I didn't find anything unusual. It was only later that I remembered that we used the backup function together, which automatically saved pictures from the camera in Google Photos. Realizing this, I logged into my laptop where she had a user profile and used the saved credentials for further investigation. When I checked her email, everything seemed normal until I came across her photo collection. To my surprise, there was a huge amount of candid photos and videos taken by her in the past about 4 months ago. They weren't meant for me, as I had never seen them before. It turned out that she deleted them from her phone, but forgot to delete them from the backup. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to continue the search by opening the video camera on her phone and scrolling through the discovered content. Before entering into a conversation with her, I decided to rewrite this material in case she remembers and erases it. I kept this information for several days, trying to treat it with understanding and considering possible explanations for its presence. At that time, OnlyFans had not yet gained much popularity, so initially I thought that she could post explicit materials online, but that would be completely out of character for her. I emphasized that she has always been very reserved and reserved. I honestly couldn't imagine how this could be explained, except that she has a romantic relationship with someone else. Once again, I expressed my suspicions to her and said that something was wrong with her, but I refrained from announcing the facts I discovered because I really wanted her to give an explanation that would debunk my doubts and make me stupid. In response, she was slightly offended, reminding us that we had already discussed this issue, and of course, denying her relationship with another man. There was a lack of any activity. I asked her again if she needed to share something or speak out, and again she refused. In the run-up to this conversation, I got access to her Google account again. Accordingly, I presented her with all the information I received and demanded an explanation from her about the contents of her Google account. Her initial reaction was surprised, but she quickly pulled herself together. She accused me of ruining an unexpected anniversary gift she had planned for me. Knowing that we both travel a lot, she wanted to give me something interesting for the time of our separation. But I remained skeptical and decided to play a bluff. I told her that I had access not only to her Google account, hoping that this would force her to admit the truth. On my ultimatum to leave if she didn't confess, she couldn't hold back her tears and insisted that everything was not as it seems. Apologizing, she asked for forgiveness. She claimed that she had done nothing wrong, but only acted stupidly. When I asked what kind of person she was talking about, she called him her colleague. They first met at a work event at the end of 2016 year, about 7 months before this momentous event. Interestingly, he holds a similar position in another branch of the same company located in another major city about 200 miles away from us. At first, they communicated by email mainly on work issues. After exchanging numbers, she stressed that, given his extensive experience in this position, her only intention was to get professional advice and share tips. It was her recent promotion to a similar position that triggered the beginning of their correspondence, which mainly concerned work issues. Gradually, more personal topics began to appear in their correspondence, and he began to flirt, to which she willingly reciprocated. Realizing the need for privacy, he offered to transfer their communication to an encrypted messaging application. From my point of view, this man had a tendency to pursue married women, which seemed to me very unpleasant. As a result, these first messages were deleted, so I never saw them. But the rest of their conversation was preserved in the messaging app they used. When I said I wanted to watch, she resisted and began to emotionally dissuade me from watching. At the same time, I reminded her that I was ready to leave if she wasn't completely honest with me. In the end, she reluctantly opened the app. She handed it to me and curled up with her head in her lap. The content of the letter was disgusting. It was filled with explicit words as well as provocative photos and videos. Both interlocutors seemed excited about the upcoming summer working event in which they had to spend 2 nights in a hotel. Their messages were shockingly graphic, detailing what they planned to do to each other. As I continued reading, my thoughts immediately returned to the video I mentioned earlier. I asked if she had sent him this video, but in response, she burst into tears even more. Trying to gather more information, I scrolled through the conversation thread until I came across a video. To my horror, I saw that they were exchanging numerous notes discussing him. He even expressed pleasure from indulging in pleasure while watching the video, and she replied that it turns her on. This revelation made a deep impression on me, and I felt deeply offended. I was struck not only by the fact that she shared a very personal and intimate video with him, but also that it was an emotional betrayal. Participation in such a vulnerable action was completely alien to me. Let me explain that I have never done or shared explicit photos, let alone sent them. Just the thought of sharing such an intimate picture with someone, especially someone she was related to, was incredibly frightening to me. But they both managed to involve me in their past relationships, although I never participated in them of my own free will. Maybe not on purpose, but it seemed so. Now, thinking about it, I realized with deep regret that I was just her replacement and an equal participant in that video. I realized that all those worries and experiences that I expected were directed solely for his benefit and not for mine. So, I made the difficult decision to leave and tell her about my desire to divorce. Despite the fact that she moved out, she insisted on her desire to reconcile. To get my bearings in the current situation, I consulted with several divorce lawyers who informed me that a settlement agreement would inevitably lead to a significant decrease in my financial well-being and joint custody of our child. After carefully studying my financial capabilities and having numerous conversations with my parents, I came to this conclusion. Turning to my colleague for advice and trusting my friends, I came to the conclusion that divorce is the most appropriate option. I believed that I could overcome financial difficulties in a reasonable time, which would allow me to retire as I had planned. In addition, I believed that my daughter's well-being would be better if she had contented parents, even if they were no longer married. When I finally reached out to my wife to tell her about my decision to start divorce proceedings, she surprised me by offering a deal. She offered to hold a trial separation for a year, during which we will have time to cool down and restore the relationship. After seeking advice from a marriage counselor, I thought about the situation again. If I decided to move on, the consultant would be ready to facilitate the divorce process, which provides for equal custody of the child and a more favorable distribution of property. After careful consideration, I agreed to this decision. I made it clear to my wife that I intend to approach our separation as if I were single. Given the length of our relationship and my limited experience when we first started dating, I felt that I needed to gain more life experience in order to make an informed decision about our future. I expressed to her my dissatisfaction with her behavior in this way, and made it clear that if she considers it unfair or feels uncomfortable in such an unequal position, then we can think about a divorce. Although it was unpleasant for her, she understood my point of view and eventually agreed. Soon after, I started dating other women, including a romantic relationship with a woman I met at the gym that lasted several months. It seems that my wife doubted the sincerity of our relationship. She didn't handle the situation properly. During our first marriage consultation, we introduced ourselves to each other and discussed our circumstances. The marriage counselor asked about my dating status, to which I replied in the affirmative. In response to this, my wife made the following remark: "I don't see the point in us going through this if you're dating other women." After the session, I agreed with her opinion and expressed the belief that marriage counseling may not be a useful idea. She subsequently apologized and retracted her words. I told her we could revisit the idea later. Over the next few months, she periodically, often late at night, sent me messages asking why I had treated her like this and whether I had not punished her properly. After about a year and a half, I began to consider the possibility of reconciliation. We successfully engaged in co-parenting and spent time with our daughter as one family. Besides, the dates were incredibly dull. Perhaps it was premature, but disappointment overwhelmed me. After numerous dates and even second and third dates, I realized that I couldn't imagine anything more than casual relationships with the women I dated. As a result, having been divorced for more than a year, I decided to end my dating. This decision allowed me to devote more time to reuniting with my wife. At the beginning of 2019, I invited her to move in with us to rebuild our family. This news caused great joy to my daughter. The restoration of our relationship was based on our common path to raising a child. I can trust my wife endlessly. As a mother, she is excellent, and I have full confidence in her ability to make reasonable and responsible financial decisions. In addition, I implicitly trust her to make important medical decisions on my behalf if I am unable to do so. But despite all this, romantic love between us has not been revived. Unfortunately, I no longer feel a deep sense of gratitude for having her in my life. Although in some aspects our relationship is not true, it does not reduce my overall happiness. I have not lost hope for her return for a long time, but it has been more than 4 years since we reconciled. It seems that it will never be so good again. Nevertheless, I am content to fulfill the role of a responsible partner and devoted father on a daily basis. It used to suit me quite well, but recent events have brought discord into our relationship, and I feel depressed and lost. After the betrayal, I really count on the support of others. My best friend and I have been inseparable since we were teenagers. We were next to each other at all important events, from proms to weddings and even the birth of our children. Despite the busy life, we managed to find time for joint sports several times a week. During the difficult period of our separation from my wife, he was a support for me. He checked on me every day, made sure I took care of myself, and held me accountable. He even made sure that I was responsible for drinking. I tried not to succumb to excessive alcohol addiction and to keep my composure until I regained stability in my life. But after I took over the organization of Thanksgiving last year, the situation began to change. He became distant, often canceled our classes at the gym, and generally avoided communication. At first, I attributed this behavior to being busy during the holiday season, given the family and work responsibilities that usually consume all of us at this time. From time to time, I contacted him by SMS to find out how he was doing, but his answers usually came down to short messages or a simple thumbs-up emoji. I didn't attach much importance to this. Perhaps he just needed a personal space. I tried to communicate with him and convince him of my sincere care and support. But in January, my wife confronted me with the fact that I had not informed her about the divorce of my closest friend and his wife. I was completely unaware of the situation she was talking about. As it turned out, my friend's wife turned to my wife with a request to help her overcome infidelity and convince her of the need to work on their marriage. In response, my wife just offered her typical advice. She stressed the importance of qualities such as transparency, patience, and respect, and even advised me to read something. But I was struck by his reaction to someone else's situation. Despite the obvious irony in her answer, I refrained from expressing my thoughts. It was very sad for me to watch the pain they caused a person. I, like everyone else, knew about the difficulties they faced and could not understand why they did not turn to me for support. After all, this man gave me incredible support during my wife's infidelity, and I thought he should have known that I would never condemn him. Driven by my anxiety, I started reaching out to him, inviting him to the gym or for a drink, hoping to find solace. We were engaged, for example, in a game of disc golf, but it took a long time to persuade him. When we met, his attitude towards me was far from warm. He seemed terse and unfriendly. But as we talked, he gradually began to tell his story. He said that at some point, his wife told him that they should live separately, as I did. She even suggested that extramarital affairs are common in many marriages. His wife's disbelief in his fidelity led to the fact that he began to think about divorce. It was obvious that he partially blamed me for the current situation. The pain inflicted on me was as sharp as a blade. The mere thought that I had played some role, even the most insignificant, in the cruel fate of my friend's betrayal caused almost as much pain as the discovery of my wife's infidelity. Did my decision to stay with my wife somehow affect this outcome? Does forgiving infidelity mean that it becomes more tolerable? Is there anything I can do to help my friend? I tried to explain why I decided to stay, emphasizing that our relationship had become purely practical. Our marriage no longer resembled what it was before, but I was not confused by his indifference. I think he has every right to be angry, and I sympathize with him. The recent incident has once again touched old emotional wounds, which has significantly worsened our relationship with my wife. It's been 2 months since our last intimacy, and even eye contact or physical touch has become a difficult task for me. The thought of divorce began to cross my mind again. Fortunately, my daughter has already grown up and is able to cope with the possible consequences of a divorce. I believe that she is at the age when she can express her wishes and opinions about our family situation. I have full confidence in my wife's ability to be a great co-parent, regardless of the state of our relationship. I'm depressed by the feeling that we have fallen back a lot, and I feel a strong sense of guilt. Moreover, I am somewhat disgusted by my actions. Have any of you ever experienced this overwhelming sense of guilt, especially at such an advanced stage? How do you deal with it? Logically, I understand that I am not to blame, but his criticism puts a lot of pressure on my conscience. I can't help him the same way he once helped me. I am genuinely at a loss what to do. Any advice or words of support would be greatly appreciated. I can't help but wonder if cheating has permanently damaged the part of me that is looking for connection and intimacy. After our conversation, I was left with a feeling of emptiness and the absence of any real essence. I remember lying in bed one weekend and thinking about the lack of emotions I should be experiencing. I was in the company of an amazing woman, experiencing a tender and charming moment, but an inexplicable emptiness reigned inside me. Throughout the meeting, I longed for the deep connection and intimacy that my wife and I once had, but it never arose. This inability to feel burdened me with guilt and deep self-doubt. When my wife and I reconciled, I hoped to regain the deep satisfaction and connection that we once shared. But despite the fact that the physical aspect of our relationship is enjoyable, there is no true satisfaction in it. It seems that I'm just doing some actions and not experiencing a genuine connection with my wife. Since the last time I expressed my concerns, there has been some improvement in our relations. We had several conversations, and I have to mention the insight and intelligence of my wife, who understood what was bothering me. I asked her why she felt entitled to condemn my friend's wife for behaving the same way as herself. She categorically denied the similarity, claiming that Mike's wife had repeatedly cheated while she herself had never done it. It was obvious that she had convinced herself that she had never wanted to cheat with a third person. I reminded her about our common conversations, to which she replied something like this: "I made a big mistake and allowed myself to get carried away by the moment, even though I had no intention of doing anything. She just doesn't get it. Or maybe I don't understand it. I'm not sure." On the one hand, I understand that our situation could have been much worse. On the other hand, I can't get rid of the guilt. It still weighs on me. At least we're communicating now. Some people offered psychotherapy, but we never went to marriage counseling after the first session. But my wife attended individual therapy sessions during our separation. My family is going through an ordeal when it comes to the treatment of mental illness. In an era of less understanding, my grandmother was mistreated by mental health professionals, which left an indelible mark on our perception. Therefore, for me, it became a serious obstacle in finding help for myself. I do not know how to overcome this obstacle. As for Mike, I decided to give him the space you all recommended. I contacted him by text message expressing my support, apologizing for his current difficulties, and assuring him of my presence and support. In response, he gave me a thumbs up, indicating that he needed my help. I couldn't help but feel sorry for him and would like to support him. I am grateful to all of you for becoming an umbrella for me, because I can't share these things with anyone in my life. They either condemn me or condemn my wife, which is not good for anyone. I will be very grateful for any advice or words of support once again. And another thing, tonight was an unexpected plus, for the first time since the new year, and the incident with Mike and his wife. After finishing work, she drank several glasses of wine. From the very beginning, she radiated an undeniable beauty that has always captivated me. Lately, my desire to get a physical release has been increasing at an alarming rate. Everything is complicated by the fact that as a result of her infidelity, it turned out that I am not an integral part of her past life. Perhaps I'm just a preference, not an absolute necessity. Which means that if I can't satisfy her desires, then someone else will undoubtedly do it. There was no trace of tenderness or intimacy in this meeting. Instead, there was a dark, desperate, and even primal energy in it. As soon as she reached the end, immediately there was a desire to take a shower, which I did. Unfortunately, her feelings were hurt, and they would have been hurt even more if I had rejected her. I'm not sure that such an outcome can be considered a victory for me. I apologize for clouding the mood, but now I'm deeply disappointed in myself and in our situation. The fact that I've shared my thoughts here brings me some comfort. When I was growing up, my father inspired me that a man should silently cope with his problems and fulfill his duties, since no one cares about our emotional well-being. They value us only for our usefulness. Perhaps it is not surprising that he passed away at such a young age. After the incident I have already described, an awkward tension reigned in our family. To avoid this awkwardness, I deliberately kept my presence to a minimum, which was made possible thanks to my daily routine, which includes work and gym classes. In addition, my daughter and I found solace in our common passion for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This activity has become a favorite for us, especially considering that various events are held in the gym every evening on weekdays and on Sunday afternoons. Therefore, we plunged headlong into this activity, spending a significant amount of time together. At the beginning of February, the news of the death of my mother's sister reached us. Living in a neighboring state, she left behind cherished family photos, looms, and personal belongings that were very important to my mother. Without hesitation, I offered to go on a trip to pick up these valuable things. The agreement on this was reached about 3 weeks ago, and my wayward wife and I were going to make a trip together last weekend. Just on Friday, we were getting ready to go to work. I once again told her about the plans for our Sunday trip and volunteered to go myself, despite the fact that the journey was going to be long, more than 4 hours in each direction. Although I had already informed her that I could handle it, I reminded her of my past experience of such a trip. She expressed a desire to go, but I convinced her that everything was fine and that she probably had more interesting ways to spend Sunday. But she insisted on keeping me company and said she didn't mind coming with me. I told her that I wanted her to come with me, but at the same time stressed that in the end, she decides for herself whether to stay at home or join the trip. In response, I said that, of course, I wanted her to come with me. I had no desire for her to go, not because I didn't want to, but because I understood that it would be an unpleasant experience for her. Therefore, on Sunday morning, I got up early and made sure that my mother took care of our daughter for the whole day. As soon as everything was settled, I returned home for my wife, ready to hit the road. The first hour of the ride passed in silence, as she had just woken up, and she does not like to talk in the morning. In the end, we stopped for breakfast and, having refreshed ourselves and drunk some coffee, started a conversation that mainly concerned our daughter and work. After that, everything took an unexpected turn. Our conversation was casual, consisted of small conversations and nothing special. Suddenly, she asked about Mike's well-being. Not knowing about his current situation, I confessed my ignorance. This revelation puzzled her, considering that we have always been linked by a close friendship. I explained that I hadn't had any meetings with him since our last meeting over drinks a few months ago. Perplexed, she asked if there was any particular incident that caused our separation. I explained that the whole point was that we were both busy with our lives, which made it difficult for us to communicate. Despite my attempts to change the conversation, she didn't want to back down. She began to criticize me, claiming that I did not support a friend and expressing disappointment about my absence during difficult times for him. She insisted that the reason for his difficulties was his wife's infidelity and the upcoming divorce. Although I felt the tension rising in me, I managed to contain it. Instead, I calmly told her that I no longer wanted to continue the conversation and drowned out her words by turning on the sound of my music podcast. Deep down, I knew that this conversation was inevitable and had to take place. I've always been better able to express my thoughts in writing than to speak spontaneously. In order to prepare for this conversation, I actively participated in discussions on the internet, which turned out to be useful. In addition, I keep a diary where I write down the questions that I need answers to and formulate my thoughts that I want to convey to the audience. Although I am aware of my stubbornness, the invaluable advice I have received from everyone here has really had a significant impact on me. Without thinking twice, I decided to turn down the volume of the stereo system. I told her about my meeting with Mike, explaining that his wife, like me, encouraged him to live separately. I stressed that infidelity, unfortunately, had become commonplace in marriage, which led him to believe that his reaction had been exaggerated. I told him that there was some truth in his wife's point of view and suggested that by staying with a cheater, a person unwittingly normalizes the act of treason. In addition, I expressed the opinion that it would be extremely important for his wife to witness the consequences that my wife experienced after losing her marriage. Perhaps she wouldn't have taken the action she did. I also mentioned that Mike's divorce and our conversation about it caused me painful memories, making me think about her infidelity and about our marriage. She reacted to this with some anger and protection, as is often the case, criticizing Mike, and once again objecting to the fact that I called her relationship with a colleague treason. Trying to avoid a difficult discussion, I advised her not to pay attention to this issue, admitting that I regretted raising it, and suggesting instead to focus on the beauty of trees and flowers. In this regard, I turned on the radio again, and we spent about 30 minutes in awkward silence. In the end, she seemed to calm down, apologized, and expressed a desire to talk. Reluctantly, I agreed, allowing her to continue the conversation. Her first question was whether I still loved her, to which I answered honestly, admitting that I was not sure. She said she knew about my feelings for her. Curious, I asked how she could be sure of that if I couldn't figure it out myself. In response, she said that love is an action, not just a feeling. She said that she feels my love because I am devoted to our family. I am a devoted father. I faithfully fulfill my duties every day, and even received her in our house during our separation. Even in the most difficult times, she trusted me infinitely. When she needed me, she knew she could rely on me without hesitation. Being next to me, she felt confident both for herself and for our daughter. She believed that all my actions stem from love, and if she felt that I loved her, she considered it a real affection. She asked me inquisitively if I believed she loved me. I confidently replied that I knew what she loved, and admitted that her life would probably be easier if she decided to leave, and love would be the driving force behind her decision. I wondered why she decided to stay with me, despite the fact that she put our family at risk during the betrayal. I couldn't understand how she could claim to love me and still behave like that. I expressed my doubts, suggesting that there must be something insufficient in me that makes her look for connections with another person. I was puzzled why she never raised these issues with me, and I stressed that she should have ended the relationship, not changed. This upset her, and she emphatically stated that the issue of leaving had not even been considered by her. She loved me very much, but I could not understand how consistent and logical her words were. I wondered why she would enter into a relationship with another man if she wasn't dissatisfied. I wondered if I hadn't given her enough attention to make her feel wanted and loved. Although she assured me that I had done nothing wrong, she admitted that in our long-term relationship, she began to take these aspects for granted. In this situation, it is quite possible that I did all these actions for her out of a sense of duty or obligation. She also expressed her uncertainty about our relationship, mentioning that she always noticed attention from other women to me. It made her feel inferior, as if she didn't have a special place in my life. She believed that without her presence, I would have had many alternatives. It was this fact that attracted her to a partner who turned out to be much older than us, short and bald. This man had a big belly, who was the complete opposite of me in appearance, mentioned that he had seen photos of his wife. His wife looked like an average middle-aged woman, quite normal, but not particularly attractive. Compared to her, my wife was younger and more attractive, and he felt that she had a special place in his heart. Thanks to his undivided attention, she felt incredibly confident and valuable. She found great pleasure in the intense, almost obsessive desire that he felt for her. She understood that she was the only one causing him such strong emotions. It had an intoxicating effect on me, almost like a potent substance. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked if she had any suspicions or concerns about my loyalty. To my surprise, she replied with a firm refusal. She absolutely trusted me, was sure that my strong sense of loyalty and devotion would not allow treason, even if such a desire arose. But when I started dating other women during our breakup, her perception changed dramatically. The shock and disbelief she experienced manifested itself in her violent reaction. I asked why I was not worthy of receiving the same loyalty and devotion from her. In response, she resolutely said that she was loyal and devoted to me, stressing that she would never change me. But I reminded her that messages were found in their chat about the intention to meet and enter into a physical relationship during a regional event of their company. To my surprise, she brushed him off, claiming that she was just flattering his ego and that the company does not plan to send her to the event this year, since it is held on a shift basis. She did this solely to support his faith and ensure a constant flow of attention. Curious, I asked if she was attracted to him, to which she, grinning, denied it. I expressed my bewilderment, explaining that her statements look contradictory and cannot be true at the same time. In response, she made a comparison between her relationship by SMS and the man's use of explicit content to increase energy levels. There is enthusiasm and anticipation around her and his partner, which indicates a strong bond between them. But it is important to note that this does not mean a lack of love or a desire to be with someone else. Such moods contrast sharply with the experiences of a person discussing his love partner who felt cheerful and inspired by the attention he received from her. As a result, her connection with me has become even more pleasant. This prompted me to think about how intense and assertive our relationship was before D-Day. She talked about her feelings with great enthusiasm. According to her, this novel played a crucial role in increasing her self-esteem, and it seemed to her that she could not get enough of my presence. She made it clear that her relationship with him had nothing to do with these feelings. It became obvious that these were the very problems that she diligently solved in therapy. On the other hand, I myself have never turned to a therapist because for me it has always been a difficult topic. Mental health problems were characteristic of my father's family, who suffered from serious mental illnesses. Despite his condition, he managed to function quite well. Most of the time he experienced only occasional bouts of delirium. On the contrary, his mother's condition was much more severe, which repeatedly led to her being placed in psychiatric clinics, since she posed a real danger to both her family and herself. In the 60s and 70s, when she worked in the psychiatric care system, the understanding and treatment of mental illnesses were far from what they are today. As a result, my father witnessed how his mother was subjected to extremely cruel and inadequate care. As a child of a father who was constantly afraid of doctors and hospitals, I also developed a deep-rooted distrust of mental health professionals. The constant worry that my father would be suddenly separated from his family during bouts of illness filled me with anxiety. Fortunately, I managed to avoid the same problems that my father and grandmother had. Moreover, having passed the age at which the symptoms of the disease usually appear, I became more inclined to ignore the emerging signs. I decided to abandon the idea of marriage counseling after one meeting. I was actively looking for a justification, and although I first met with 2 psychotherapists, I felt extremely uncomfortable and decided not to continue working with either of them. Now I do not know how to overcome all the emotional burden that I carry. Perhaps therapy could be beneficial, but I'm afraid that my spouse can only share what is beneficial to her. This is a dilemma. When we got to our destination, we began to pack my aunt's things. Spending a few hours with my uncle has become a habit for me, but there is always a strange feeling that accompanies the work of sorting out a person's things after his death. The first time I experienced this disturbing feeling was when my father died. It struck me that all their possessions remained, but they themselves were no longer there. Their whole life fit into some objects, and among them, there are many things that may seem insignificant to us, but for them, they were of great importance. Unfortunately, we will never understand the reasons for their attachment. In a heavy and solemn atmosphere, we returned home, reflecting on the difficult process of sorting out my aunt's things. We both went over our detailed conversation in memory, feeling all its weight. Exhausted by the long day, we delved into our relationship and thought about seeking marriage counseling. Although I doubted it, I promised her that I would seriously consider this idea. As for the details of her affair and the person who participated in it, I do not know how to understand them. Should I trust her story? And even if I do, will it bring me any consolation or will it upset me even more? I'm not sure yet. We talked much deeper than before, and I believe that driving a car played a role in the fact that we were able to open up, since we didn't have to look into each other's eyes. It was almost like being in a confession booth. It seems to me that it is much more pleasant when some of our problems are open. Perhaps this will allow us to move on together, regardless of whether it will lead to a stronger marriage or a decision to break up. But nevertheless, it means progress. And I find encouragement in the fact that we both persevered through the discomfort to have this conversation. I managed not to withdraw into myself, and this is already a positive step. She managed to overcome her defensive attitude, which in the past always interfered with conversation. I may have played a role in her tendency to downplay some issues. I'm not saying that her act wasn't serious, because it definitely was, and it continues to put the relationship at risk. But in my opinion, Mike's wife's infidelity was much more serious. She had an affair with a mutual friend with whom they all spent time together, and her husband also considered him a friend. Throughout the novel, it was evident that she repeatedly entered into an affair with her partner, even within their common home and in their bed. Thinking about it, I couldn't help but admit that if my wife had shown even a fraction of such disrespect to me, I would have quickly put an end to our relationship. I firmly believe that if she had taken their illicit relationship beyond the virtual space and moved on to a physical, personal affair, I would have left without hesitation. This part of the conversation bothered me, but I must pay tribute to the courage of my wife, who reported the affair to the HR department given the strict company policy prohibiting fraternal relations. I also made it clear to the other person's spouse that if she doesn't take action, I will, and stressed the importance of proper behavior if we want to postpone the divorce process. Therefore, I am not sure how great her merit is. Anyway, the unfaithful wife eventually decided to quit her job after the situation became public. Otherwise, there was a possibility that she could face dismissal, although this is doubtful, given her experience and the role of her professional mentor. However, this would have caused complications and would have led to his dismissal. Apparently, the spouse who was betrayed by his actions also decided to divorce him, and my wife and I continued to preserve our family, gradually establishing our intimate and spiritual relations.